The dust-colored sky hung heavy over the Texas plains as a lone wagon approached the trading post at Cooper's Creek. Rain threatened in the distance, darkening the horizon like a bruise. The few people present hurried about their business, eager to finish before the storm broke. Only one figure remained motionless amid the activity, a young woman with hollow eyes, standing apart from the wagons, clutching a worn leather satchel to her chest. Her throat bore cruel marks that told a story without words, and her gaze darted like a cornered animal's. In a world that demanded strength, she seemed fragile enough to shatter, yet something in her stance suggested she'd already survived. What should have broken her completely? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The trading post at Cooper's Creek existed at the edge of two worlds, not quite. Civilization, not quite wilderness, a collection of wooden buildings surrounded by a weathered fence. It served as the last outpost before the territories many settlers dared not enter. The main building housed supplies, ammunition, and the bare essentials travelers might need. A smaller structure served as both post office and telegraph station, while various outbuildings provided temporary shelter for those passing through. The station master, Frank Whitley, watched the young woman from the doorway of his office. Rain had begun to fall, soft at first, then with increasing intensity. Most travelers had taken shelter, but she remained where she was, water streaming down her face, plastering her faded dress to her thin frame. "Miss," he called, his voice barely audible above the growing storm. "Last wagon's gone. Next one ain't." "Oh, due till morning." She didn't respond, just blinked through rain-soaked lashes. Frank stepped out, holding his hat against the wind. "You need to come inside, miss. Storm's only getting worse." When she didn't move, he approached cautiously and reached for her arm. She recoiled violently, stumbling backward, her hand flying to her throat. Her lips parted, but the sound that emerged was a painful rasp that died before becoming words. It was then Frank noticed the marks encircling her neck, deep purple bruising that formed an unmistakable pattern. "Good Lord," he whispered, taking an involuntary step back. "Someone did that to you." The woman's eyes pleaded silently. "You need help," Frank said, recovering his composure. "Dr. Mitchell's in town, or I could fetch Sheriff Taylor." She shook her head frantically, real terror washing over her face at the mention of law enforcement. From her pocket, she produced a crumpled piece of paper and held it out with trembling fingers. Frank squinted at the rain-smeared writing. "Broken. Arrow Creek?" he frowned. "That's Apache territory, miss. Nothing out there but wilderness and the old Montgomery trading station." He hesitated. "Look, I can't let you go out there alone. There's a mission house in town that takes in—" She snatched the paper back, clutching it like salvation itself. Her determination was clear, even without words. Frank sighed heavily, running a hand through his graying hair. "Broken Arrow's that way," he said, pointing toward a trail that disappeared into dense mesquite and oak. "But it's 20 miles at least, and no one's going to take you there with night coming and this weather." He studied her face. "Who are you running from, miss?" Her eyes dropped to the ground, but her posture remained rigid with purpose. "At least wait out the storm," Frank urged. "I've got a back room, clean blankets, food." For a moment, indecision flickered across her face. Her exhaustion was evident in the dark circles beneath her eyes and the way she swayed slightly on her feet. But something stronger than weariness drove her. She shook her head again and turned toward the trail Frank had indicated. "Damn foolishness," he muttered, watching her retreating figure. "Nobody survives out there alone." Inside his office, Frank poured himself a measure of whiskey and stared at the telegraph machine. His finger tapped an irregular pattern on his desk as he debated with himself. Finally, he reached for the paper, where descriptions of wanted criminals and missing persons were posted. Nothing matched the young woman. No one was officially looking for someone of her description, which didn't mean no one was looking. The rain turned to sheets of water as dusk deepened. The young woman, who thought of herself as Emma, though she'd been called many things, trudged along the muddy trail. The name Emma belonged to before her voice had been taken, before she'd been traded like cattle, before she'd learned how cruel the world could be to those without protection. Passing headlights occasionally illuminated her struggling form as supply wagons and traders made their way toward Cooper's Creek. None stopped. In these territories, strangers meant danger, and a woman alone after dark meant trouble no one wanted. At the edge of what passed for civilization, a small trading post called the Last Stop clung to existence. Its weathered sign creaked in the wind, and yellow light spilled from its windows. Emma paused beneath the overhang, seeking momentary shelter from the downpour. Through rain-streaked glass, she could see people inside, a family purchasing supplies, a trader counting coins, ordinary lives continuing without awareness of her desperation. Her reflection stared back at her, a ghost with haunted eyes and soaked clothing. The door swung open, spilling light and warmth into the night. A man stepped out, his broad shoulders filling the doorframe, a wide-brimmed hat shadowing his face. He paused when he saw her, head tilting slightly. "You lost girl." His voice was rough, made gravelly by years of hard living. Emma shrank back into the shadows, avoiding his gaze. "I'm talking to you." When she didn't answer, his expression hardened. "We don't need your sort around here. Town's got enough troubles." Inside, a woman behind the counter looked up at the raised voice. She caught Emma's eye through the window and reached for something beneath the counter. A weapon, perhaps, or the telegraph that would summon men who would drag her back to the place. She'd fled. Emma turned and ran, abandoning the minimal shelter of the overhang. Behind her, the man called out, but his words dissolved in the wind and rain. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs trembled with exhaustion, until the lights of the last stop disappeared completely. The storm intensified, lightning forking across the sky in brilliant flashes that momentarily turned night to day. Between these flashes, the darkness was absolute. After what felt like hours, Emma stumbled upon a fork in the trail, barely visible in the mud. A weathered post marked the junction, bearing no words, only a crude carving of an arrow broken in half. This had to be it, the path to Broken Arrow Creek. The trail wound through dense brush, hardly more than a game path in places. Mud sucked at her shoes with every step, threatening to pull them from her feet. When lightning flashed again, she glimpsed a clearing ahead and the dark outline of a structure. As she approached the building, a low, sprawling construction of stone and timber, no lights welcomed her. The place appeared abandoned, but it matched the description on her paper. 3 wooden steps led to a covered porch where a single chair rocked empty in the wind. Emma hesitated at the bottom step, heart hammering against her ribs. This was her only hope, the one place her mother had told her to seek if everything fell apart. "If the worst happens," she had whispered during their brief moments alone, "find James Montgomery at Broken Arrow. He owes me a debt he can never repay. He'll keep you safe." That was before they'd taken her mother away, before Emma had been given to the man who eventually tried to silence her permanently when she refused to yield. She was raising her foot to climb the first step when the distinctive sound of a rifle being cocked froze her in place. "That's far enough." The voice came from the darkness to her right, deep and steady. "Turn around. Slow." Emma obeyed, raising trembling hands to show they were empty. Lightning illuminated the scene, revealing a tall figure emerging from the shadows beside the building. The brief flash showed a man with copper skin and angular features, hair pulled back from his face, a rifle held with the ease of someone who considered it an extension of himself. His clothing blended Western and traditional elements. Denim, leather and beaded accents that marked his heritage. "What business brings you here in the dead of night?" he demanded, keeping the rifle trained on her. Emma pointed to her throat, then shook her head, trying to communicate her inability to speak. The man stepped closer, moving with a predator's grace. Lightning flashed again, illuminating them both. More clearly, he studied her face, then his gaze dropped to the bruising around her neck. "Can't speak or won't speak?" he asked, his voice unchanged, but his eyes narrowing slightly. She touched the marks on her throat, then dropped her hand. The man lowered his rifle fractionally. "These are dangerous lands for anyone traveling alone, especially someone who can't call for help." Emma reached into her pocket for the paper with Broken Arrow Creek written on it, but the rain had reduced it to pulp. She discarded it, then made a writing motion with her hand. "You're looking for someone," he stated rather than asked. "Who?" She mimed writing again, more urgently. The man considered her for a long moment, then jerked his head toward the door. "Inside! This storm isn't letting up." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Emma followed the man into the trading post, leaving puddles of rainwater on the wooden floor. The interior was surprisingly well maintained compared to the weathered exterior. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its embers casting a faint orange glow across the room. Oil lamps hung from ceiling beams, unlit but ready. The space was organized with military precision, trading goods and supplies neatly arranged on shelves, weapons displayed on racks but secured with locks, a counter for transactions, and a small living area with simple furniture. A large dog, some mix of shepherd and wolf, raised its head from a rug near the fire, ears alert at their entrance. "Stay, Hawk," the man commanded. The dog settled back down, but kept watchful eyes on Emma. The man lit one of the oil lamps, illuminating the space more fully. In the improved light, Emma could see he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps early 30s, with a long scar that ran from his left temple to jawline. His movements were measured and deliberate as he secured the door against the storm. "You're looking for James Montgomery," he said. "Not a question, but a statement of fact." Emma nodded eagerly, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time. "James Montgomery has been dead for 2 years. The hope vanished. Emma's shoulders slumped, and she swayed slightly on her feet, exhaustion and despair overwhelming her. "I'm his son, Thomas." He set his rifle in a stand by the door, but kept a knife at his belt. "Most folks around here call me Wolf." Emma didn't respond, still processing the death of her only potential ally in this wilderness. Wolf studied her with narrowed eyes. "Who sent you to my father? You're not from around here." Emma gestured toward herself, then made a rocking motion with her arms. "A child?" Wolf's brow furrowed. "You were a child when you knew him." She shook her head, then pointed to herself and made the rocking motion again. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You're saying he knew you as a baby? That's impossible. My father didn't leave these territories for 30 years before his death." Emma shook her head in frustration, then pointed to her heart, made the rocking motion, and pointed back to his father's name carved above the fireplace. "He cared for you? Protected you?" Wolf guessed, his voice skeptical. She shook her head again, more frantically. "Wait here," Wolf commanded. He disappeared through a door at the back of the room, returning moments later with a slate and chalk. "Write what you're trying to say." Emma took them gratefully. Her hands trembled as she wrote, "My mother knew him, said he would help." Wolf read the words, his expression giving nothing away. "Your mother's name?" She hesitated, then wrote, "Hannah." "Carlyle." Wolf's face transformed instantly, all neutrality vanishing. "Hannah Carlyle," he repeated, his voice barely audible. He turned away abruptly, moving to the window to stare out at the storm, his posture rigid. Emma couldn't interpret his reaction. She stood motionless, clutching the slate, uncertain whether to flee or stay. After a long silence, Wolf spoke without turning. "Hannah Carlyle is still alive." Emma wrote on the slate and tapped it to get his attention. "Taken 3 months ago by Ryder's men." Wolf turned, his jaw tight. "Joseph Ryder? The rancher?" His voice carried a dangerous edge. Emma nodded, writing quickly. "He calls it a settlement." "It's a prison." Wolf's eyes darkened. "I know what Ryder's settlement is. Half church, half fortress, all controlled by him and his so-called disciples." He studied her neck. "He did that to you?" Emma shook her head, writing, "His son Nathan, when I refused, and you escaped." A hint of respect entered Wolf's voice. She nodded, adding, 4 days ago. Wolf moved to a cabinet, unlocked it, and removed a bottle and glass. He poured a generous measure of amber liquid and drank it in one swallow. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. "Hannah Carlyle was Comanche, my father's first wife." Emma's eyes widened in shock. She wrote frantically, "Impossible! My mother is white." Wolf laughed, a sound without humor. "Hannah Carlyle was born White Dove, daughter of Chief Breaking Thunder. She was educated at a mission school where they gave her that white name. She was my father's wife for 8 years before she disappeared." His eyes narrowed. "That would have been about 20 years ago." Emma stared at him, disbelief evident in her expression. She wrote, "My mother never mentioned being married before or being Comanche. Many who leave the tribe try to forget that life completely." Wolf's voice carried a bitterness that suggested personal experience. "The white world doesn't make it easy to be both." Emma sank onto a chair, her exhausted mind struggling to process this revelation. The mother she knew, gentle, soft-spoken, always afraid, had been someone else entirely before Emma was born, had lived another life, had kept secrets even when they might have saved them both. "You look like her," Wolf said suddenly. "Around the eyes, that's why you seemed familiar." Emma wrote, "Why would she send me here if your father is dead?" Perhaps, and she didn't know. Wolf ran a hand through his hair. "Or perhaps she knew I would be here. We weren't close. But blood remains blood." Thunder cracked directly overhead, making the building shudder. Rain lashed against the windows with renewed fury. "You need dry clothes," Wolf said, abruptly practical. "And food. We'll figure out the rest after." He led her to a small room off the main area. "Bathrooms there," he indicated a door. "There are clothes in the chest. They belonged to a trader's daughter who stayed here last season. Should fit well." "Enough!" Emma hesitated, pen hovering over the slate. "I'll be in the main room," Wolf said, correctly interpreting her concern. "Take your time. You're safe here tonight at least." When Emma emerged sometime later, she wore a simple cotton dress and had combed her damp hair. The bruises on her neck stood out starkly against her cleaner skin, telling their ugly story more clearly. Wolf had prepared a simple meal of beans, dried meat and cornbread, which he set on the table without ceremony. "Eat," he said. "You look half-starved." Emma didn't need to be told twice. She ate with the careful discipline of someone who had known true hunger, savoring each bite while ensuring nothing was wasted. Wolf watched her with unreadable eyes. "Ryder's men will be looking for you," he said finally. "They don't let anyone leave the settlement willingly, especially women." Emma nodded, writing, "They'll kill me if they find me." "Maybe," Wolf said. "Or worse." The implications hung heavy in the air between them. Wolf rose and moved to the window again, checking the perimeter out of habit. Hawk joined him, sensing his master's unease. "Did you tell anyone else where you were headed?" Wolf asked. Emma shook her head, then wrote, "Only showed the station master at Cooper's Creek the name of this place." "Frank Whitley." Wolf nodded. "He won't talk willingly, but if Ryder's men come through with enough men or money—" He left the sentence unfinished. Emma wrote, "I should leave at dawn. Too dangerous for you." Wolf read her words and made a sound between a laugh and a snort. I've been dangerous to Ryder's kind since before you were born, girl. He tapped the scar on his face. They gave me this 10 years back when I helped 3 women escape that settlement. I'm not afraid of them. He moved to a chest near the fireplace and unlocked it, removing a handgun. He checked it methodically before placing it on the table between them. Can you use this? He asked. Emma hesitated, then nodded. She wrote, My father taught me before he died. Good. Wolf pushed the weapon toward her. Keep it close. Anyone comes through that door who isn't me, use it. Emma took the gun, her hand steady despite her exhaustion. She wrote, Why help me? Wolf was silent for a long time. Hannah saved my life once, he finally said. When I was a boy, there was a fever. Everyone thought I would die. She stayed with me for 3 days without sleep, using the old ways to bring the fever down. His voice softened slightly with the memory. And then one morning she was gone. No goodbye. My father searched for months but never found her. Emma's face reflected her confusion. She wrote, If she was happy here, why leave? That, Wolf said, his voice hardening again, is what I've wondered for 20 years. He checked his watch. It's late. You need rest. We'll leave at first light. Emma's eyebrows rose in question. Riders. Men will be coming, Wolf explained. Better to be elsewhere when they do. I know places in these territories where they won't find us. Emma wrote, U.S.? Hannah was my father's wife, Wolf said simply. That makes you family in some twisted way, and Comanches protect their own. The words carried the weight of an oath, though his expression remained guarded. Take the bedroom. I'll sleep out. Here with Hawk. As Emma rose to go, she hesitated, then wrote one final question. What was she like? Before? Wolf's face softened almost imperceptibly. Fierce, he said after a moment. Proud. She could track better than most warriors, shoot straighter than my father. She laughed easily and sang in 2 languages. His voice grew distant, with memory. The settlers called her Hannah, but to our people she was always White Dove. The name meant nothing to Emma. This version of her mother was a stranger. She nodded her thanks for the information and disappeared into the bedroom, the weight of these revelations heavy on her shoulders. Wolf remained by the window long. After she had gone, Hawk a silent sentinel beside him. Outside, the storm continued its assault, but it was nothing compared to the tempest of memories and questions awakened by the arrival of Hannah Carlyle's daughter. After 20 years of wondering what had happened to his father's first wife, answers had literally appeared on his doorstep, bringing with them new mysteries and, undoubtedly, new dangers. He checked his weapons one by one with methodical precision, preparing for what daylight might bring. Dawn arrived with reluctant grey light filtering through the storm clouds. The rain had lessened to a steady drizzle, but the wind still howled around the trading post's eaves. Emma woke disoriented, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar surroundings. The events of the previous night rushed back. Her arrival at Broken Arrow Creek, the revelation about her mother's past, the unexpected connection to Wolf. She dressed quickly in clothes Wolf had provided, sturdy pants, a flannel shirt, and a weathered jacket that hung loose on her frame, but would provide better protection than the dress. Practical clothing for survival, not appearance. When she entered the main room, she found Wolf already awake, organizing supplies into 2 packs. Hawk lay near the door, alert and watchful, his ears perking up at her appearance. The dog studied her for a moment before rising and approaching cautiously. He sniffed her extended hand, then allowed her to stroke his head briefly. He doesn't usually take to strangers, Wolf commented, not looking up from his task. Seems you've got some of your mother in you after all. Emma picked up the slate from the night before. Where are we going? North, Wolf replied, checking ammunition before stowing it in a pack. I have a hunting cabin in the Davis Mountains, remote, defensible. We'll be safe there while we figure out our next move. Emma wrote, "Why not stay here?" "This place is known," Wolf explained. "First place riders' men will look once they pick up your trail, and they will pick it up. Men like that don't let go easily." He glanced at her bruised neck, "especially when their pride is wounded." Emma nodded her understanding, then wrote, "I can't ask you to leave your home." "You didn't." "Ask," I offered. Wolf's tone was matter-of-fact. "Besides, this isn't my permanent home. Just a trading post I maintain for supplies and information." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I move around, makes me harder to find." He handed her a pack. "Food, water, basic supplies. Keep it close." Emma took it, surprised by its weight. She wrote, "How far?" 3 days on horseback, taking the back trails." Wolf strapped on a holster, checking that his pistol slid easily from its sheath. "Riders' men will expect you to head for larger settlements. We'll go the opposite direction, deeper into the territories." Emma's eyes widened in alarm. She wrote hastily, "Indian territories." "Apache and Comanche lands," Wolf confirmed, "but I have safe passage." He tapped his chest where an unseen medallion hung beneath his shirt. "Blood counts for something still, even in these changing times." He slung his rifle over his shoulder and handed Emma a smaller one. "You remember how to use this?" She nodded, checking the weapon with competent hands. "Good. We leave in 10 minutes. Use the bathroom if you need to. No telling when we'll next have that luxury." Emma hadn't missed the way Wolf continually glanced out the windows, checking the approaches to the trading post. His tension was contagious. She moved with increased urgency, gathering the few possessions she had. The slate and chalk, a small knife she'd taken from Ryder's settlement, the locket containing the only picture of her mother she possessed. They were nearly ready to depart when Hawk growled low in his throat, ears flattening against his head. Wolf froze, listening. Emma couldn't hear anything beyond the rain and wind, but she trusted the dog's instincts. Wolf moved silently to the window, keeping to the side to avoid being seen. His body tensed. "Riders," he whispered. 5, maybe 6, coming from the east." Emma's heart pounded. East, the direction of Cooper's Creek and Ryder's settlement. "We need to go, now." Wolf grabbed their packs, tossing one to Emma. "Out the back. Horses are in the lean-to." They moved quickly through the rear door into what had once been a kitchen, but now served as storage. A second door led outside to a covered area where 2 horses waited, already saddled. Wolf had prepared for this possibility while Emma slept. "Can you ride?" Wolf asked, his voice barely audible above the rain. Emma nodded, approaching the smaller of the horses, a dun mare, with intelligent eyes. She stroked the animal's neck reassuringly before mounting with practiced ease. Wolf raised an eyebrow, apparently impressed, before mounting his own horse, a muscular black stallion. Hawk took position beside them, ready to run. "Stay close," Wolf instructed. "If we get separated, head northwest. Keep the morning sun on your right shoulder." They set off at a careful pace, keeping to the trees that lined the creek bed. The rain worked in their favor, reducing visibility and muffling the sounds of their passage. From this position, they could see the trading post while remaining hidden. 6 riders approached the building, spreading out to surround it. Even from a distance, Emma recognized the lead rider, Nathan Ryder, the man who had tried to silence her permanently when she refused to comply with his desires. The son of Joseph Ryder, he had inherited all his father's cruelty, but none of his restraint. At 25, he had already earned a reputation for brutality that made even hardened men avoid crossing him. Wolf watched the men with a predator's focus. "Nathan Ryder," he murmured, "should have put a bullet in him years ago." Emma touched his arm, shaking her head frantically. "Not planning to today," Wolf assured her. "That would bring the full force of Ryder's men down on us. Better to disappear." They watched as Nathan and his men kicked in the door of the trading post. Within minutes, sounds of destruction reached them as the men tore the place apart in their search. Wolf's jaw tightened, but he remained motionless, prioritizing their safety over his property. When the men emerged empty-handed, Nathan's rage was evident even at a distance. He shouted at his men, gesturing wildly. One of the riders pointed at the ground, then in various directions, looking for tracks. Emma realized with growing dread. "Time to go," Wolf whispered. "They'll find our trail soon enough in this mud. We need distance." They urged their horses deeper into the brush, following a game trail that paralleled the creek for several miles before turning northwest into more rugged terrain. Wolf set a grueling pace, pushing the horses as much as he dared on the treacherous ground. Hawk loped alongside, occasionally ranging ahead, but always returning to their side. By midday, the rain had stopped completely, giving way to a cold, clear sky. They paused briefly at the top of a ridge, allowing the horses to rest while Wolf surveyed their backtrail with a small spyglass. "They're following," he confirmed grimly, "but they're being cautious, not sure if they're tracking you, me, or both." Emma took out her slate. "Both. They recognize your name." Wolf nodded. "My reputation precedes me." There was no pride in his voice, only pragmatic acknowledgement. "We'll need to split up soon, make them divide their forces." Emma shook her head vehemently, writing, "Too dangerous." "For them," Wolf corrected. "I know these hills. They don't." He studied the terrain ahead. "There's a canyon 2 miles north. Narrow entrance, widens inside. Good place for an ambush, except—" Emma raised her eyebrows in question. "It's sacred ground. Old burial caves. Most Comanche avoid it, most white men too, out of superstition." Emma wrote, "But not you." "My father taught me to respect the dead, not fear them," Wolf replied. "Besides, I'd rather face angry spirits than Nathan Ryder any day." They continued their journey, the terrain growing steadily more challenging. Wolf led them through stands of juniper and pine, across shallow streams and along the edges of steep drops, always moving, never following predictable paths. Occasionally, he would stop to check their back trail or consult landmarks only he seemed to recognize. By late afternoon, they reached the canyon Wolf had mentioned. Its entrance was barely wide enough for a single horse to pass, flanked by towering walls of red rock streaked with black mineral deposits. Ancient pictographs decorated the stone near the entrance. Warnings or blessings, Emma couldn't tell which. Inside, the canyon opened into a broad space with a small stream running through its center. Wind-carved caves dotted the walls at various heights, their dark openings like watchful eyes. The air felt different here, still heavy with something Emma couldn't name. Wolf dismounted near the stream, helping Emma down from her horse. "We'll rest the horses," he said. "Prepare for what's coming." Emma wrote, "They'll follow us in here." "Some will," Wolf confirmed. "Others might wait outside. Either way, we'll be ready." He unloaded essential supplies and led the horses to a hidden alcove where they would be protected but able to escape if necessary. Hawk performed a perimeter check, his training evident in his methodical movements. Emma took the opportunity to study their surroundings more carefully. Despite the ominous feeling, the canyon held a strange beauty, ancient and untamed. Wildflowers grew in unexpected places between rocks. Small lizards sunned themselves on warm stones. Life persisted even in this place of death. Wolf returned with their weapons and packs. "We have maybe an hour before they reach this place," he estimated. "I need to know more about what we're facing. How many men does Ryder have?" Emma wrote quickly, 30-40 at the settlement, mostly ex-soldiers and hired guns. 10-12. He calls disciples. Inner circle, most dangerous. Wolf absorbed this information with a grim nod. "And your mother, where do they keep her?" Emma's expression darkened as she wrote, "Special quarters, Ryder's house. He calls her his prophetess. says she has visions. Does she? Wolf asked, his tone unreadable. Emma hesitated, then wrote, sometimes, or she pretends. Keeps her valuable to him. Wolf was quiet for a moment. Hannah was always intuitive, he finally said. Even as a girl, the tribe believed she had medicine power, the ability to see things others couldn't. This was another piece of her mother Emma had never known, another secret kept from her. She wrote, why didn't she tell me any of this? Protection, maybe, Wolf suggested. The less you knew about her past, the safer you both were. He checked his weapons again, a habitual movement. Or shame. Many who leave the tribe carry that burden. Emma considered this as she helped Wolf establish a defensive position near the canyon entrance. They worked in companionable silence, communicating through gestures and occasional notes. Wolf moved with the efficiency of someone accustomed to preparing for conflict, while Emma showed a surprising aptitude for strategy, suggesting angles of fire and escape routes Wolf hadn't immediately considered. You've done this before, he observed. Emma nodded, writing, Father was army before he died. Taught me. Wolf's respect for her grew visibly. Your father, was he a good man? Emma's eyes softened as she wrote, the best. Died defending us when Ryder's men came the first time, 5 years ago. And then they found you again, Wolf concluded. She nodded, adding, Mother said we could never run far enough. Maybe not alone, Wolf agreed. But you're not alone anymore. The simple statement hung between them. A promise, a commitment to this strange alliance formed through blood neither had known they shared until yesterday. For the first time since her escape, Emma felt something beyond fear and desperate. Survival. Something almost like hope. Hawk's alert posture interrupted the moment. The dog stared intently toward the canyon entrance, a low growl building in his throat. They're here, Wolf said quietly. Remember, if anything happens to me, head northwest, 3 days' ride to the cabin. He pressed something into her hand, a small leather pouch containing a carved wooden token bearing Comanche symbols. Show this if you encounter tribal hunters. It marks you as protected. Emma clutched the token tightly, then impulsively reached for her slate one last time. Thank you, Wolf. A hint of a smile touched his scarred face. Save your thanks for when we're clear of this mess. Together, they turned to face the approaching threat, two strangers united by blood and circumstance against a common enemy. Wolf positioned himself behind a cluster of boulders overlooking the canyon entrance, rifle ready. Emma took cover 20 feet away among the jutting rocks, giving them cross-fire position. Hawk remained hidden in the shadows, trained to attack only on command. The sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows across the canyon floor. The changing light created illusions of movement among the rock formations, making it difficult to distinguish between natural shapes and approaching threats. This optical confusion worked in their favor. Anyone entering would face the same disorientation. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Emma's muscles tensed with anticipation, her finger resting lightly alongside the trigger guard as her father had taught her. Patience, he'd always emphasized. The hasty shot often misses. Subtle movement at the canyon entrance caught her attention. Not a rider, but a man on foot moving cautiously, rifle raised. He paused just inside the narrow passage, scanning the interior. Another man joined him, then a third. Wolf remained motionless, allowing the men to advance further into the trap. Emma followed his lead, controlling her breathing as the intruders moved deeper into the canyon. From her position, she could identify Nathan Ryder among them, his tall frame and shock of blonde hair unmistakable even in the fading light. 6 men in total entered, spreading out in a practiced formation that spoke of military training. They moved with the confidence of predators accustomed to being the most dangerous presence in any situation. Several wore the distinctive leather vests of riders in a circle, his self-proclaimed disciples. When they reached the center of the open area, Wolf fired a warning shot that struck the ground several feet in front of Nathan. The men instantly dropped into defensive positions, weapons raised. "That's close enough," Wolf called out, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. Nathan recovered quickly, scanning the rocks to locate the source of the voice. "Montgomery," he shouted, "we have no quarrel with you. Hand over the girl and we'll leave your territory in peace." "The woman is under my protection," Wolf replied. "Comanche protection. Turn back now." A harsh laugh escaped Nathan. "Your Comanche blood means nothing these days, half-breed. Your people are beaten, reservation-bound, playing their parts in the government's shows." Wolf remained silent, refusing to be baited. "My father respects boundaries, Montgomery," Nathan continued, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "But that girl is his property. She belongs to our settlement." "People can't be property," Wolf responded. "That thinking went out with the war." "Not in our community," Nathan countered. "We follow older laws, divine laws that give men dominion." While Nathan kept Wolf distracted with talk, Emma noticed two of his men slowly maneuvering toward the eastern side of the canyon, attempting to flank their position. She fired a shot that chipped rock inches from the nearest man's head. He ducked back into cover, surprised by the second shooter. "The girl seems to disagree with your divine laws," Wolf observed dryly. Nathan's expression hardened. "That girl is damaged, dangerous. She attacked me without provocation, nearly killed one of our guards during her escape." He touched his face, where a faint scar ran along his jawline. Evidence, Emma knew, of her desperate fight for freedom when he'd tried to force himself on her. "Somehow I doubt that's the whole story," Wolf replied. "But it doesn't matter. She's not going back with you." "She will," Nathan insisted. "Today or another day. My father doesn't surrender what's his." His voice took on a persuasive tone. "Be reasonable, Montgomery. There's no need for bloodshed. We can compensate you for your inconvenience." Wolf's laugh was cold. "There's not enough money in Texas to buy what you're asking." The negotiation was a pretense, Emma realized. Nathan was stalling, giving his men time to find better positions. She scribbled a hasty note and threw a small stone near Wolf to get his attention. When he glanced her way, she held up the slate, circling behind. 3 men. Wolf gave an imperceptible nod, then raised his voice again. "You've got 1 minute to start riding out, Ryder. After that, things get unpleasant." "You're outnumbered, Montgomery," Nathan called back. "Even for a legend like you, those are poor odds." "Numbers aren't everything," Wolf countered, "especially not in these canyons." As if to emphasize his point, a low, moaning sound began to echo through the space. A wind current moving through the burial caves, creating an eerie wail that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Several of Ryder's men looked around nervously, their superstitious fears evident. "Ancestral spirits don't appreciate trespassers," Wolf remarked casually. Nathan scoffed, but Emma noticed how his men exchanged uneasy glances. The canyon's reputation clearly affected them, more than their leader. "Last chance, Ryder," Wolf warned. "Leave now or face the consequences." "I think not," Nathan replied. He raised his arm, signaling to his men. What happened next unfolded with explosive speed. 2 of Nathan's men opened fire on Wolf's position, forcing him into cover. Meanwhile, the 3 who had circled around launched their attack from behind, expecting to catch him unawares. Instead, they encountered Hawk. The dog burst from concealment at Wolf's whistle, a grey blur of focused aggression. He took down the nearest attacker, clamping powerful jaws around the man's gun arm. The man's scream echoed through the canyon as Wolf shifted position, firing with deadly accuracy at the second flanker. Emma engaged the 3rd man, her shot catching him in the shoulder and spinning him into the rock wall. Nathan and his remaining Companion split up, seeking better firing positions among the boulders. The canyon erupted into chaos. Gunfire, shouts, the continuing eerie wail of the wind through the caves. Emma moved quickly between positions as her father had taught her, never staying in one place long enough to become an easy target. Wolf did the same, the two of them working with surprising coordination for people who had known each other less than a day. In the midst of the firefight, the ground beneath Emma suddenly gave way, a thin crust of stone collapsing into a hidden fissure. She fell several feet before managing to catch herself on an outcropping, her rifle clattering away into darkness below. Pain shot through her shoulder as she dangled one-handed over the unseen depth. Wolf saw her predicament, but was pinned down by Nathan's fire. He whistled sharply to Hawk, directing the dog to create a distraction. The animal responded instantly, charging toward Nathan's position, forcing him to redirect his attention. In that brief window, Wolf rushed to Emma, extending his arm down into the fissure. "Grab on!" Emma reached up with her good arm, clasping his wrist as he seized hers in a warrior's grip. With remarkable strength, he pulled her from the crevice just as a bullet struck the rock where his head had been moments before. They rolled behind a boulder as more shots peppered their position. Emma's shoulder throbbed with pain, but she managed to draw her pistol with her uninjured arm. Wolf checked her briefly for serious wounds, then returned fire, keeping Nathan and his remaining man at bay. "We need to move," he said urgently. "They've called for reinforcements." He nodded toward the canyon entrance, where distant dust indicated approaching riders. Emma nodded her understanding. Wolf whistled for Hawk, who disengaged from his harassment of Nathan and bounded back to his master's side. The dog's muzzle was bloody, but he appeared uninjured. "South wall," Wolf directed. "There's a path to the upper caves. They won't follow us there." Emma glanced at the sheer rock face dubiously, but followed as Wolf led the way through tumbled boulders to a nearly invisible trail, switchbacking up the canyon wall. The path was treacherously narrow, barely wide enough for one person in places, with a sheer drop to their right. Nathan spotted their escape attempt and fired several shots, but the angle and distance made accuracy impossible. He shouted orders to his men, reorganizing his diminished force for pursuit. Wolf pushed Emma ahead of him on the narrow trail. "Keep going, don't look back." They climbed steadily, the exertion making Emma's injured shoulder scream in protest. Below, Nathan and his remaining disciples had regrouped and begun to follow, moving more cautiously on the unfamiliar terrain. Hawk scrambled up the path ahead of them, a much more agile climber than his human companions. 3/4 of the way up the wall, the path cut inward toward one of the larger cave openings. Wolf guided Emma inside just as a volley of bullets struck the rock around them. The cave extended deep into the cliff face, quickly growing dark beyond the reach of daylight. "Keep one hand on the wall," Wolf instructed, his voice low. "There's a chamber about 50 feet in, then a tunnel system that connects to the other side of the ridge." Emma touched his arm, her question obvious even without words. "Yes, I've been here before," Wolf confirmed. "My father brought me when I was a boy. These caves connect for miles under the ridgeline." They moved carefully through the darkness, the temperature dropping noticeably the deeper they went. The sound of pursuit grew fainter behind them. After several minutes of careful progress, Wolf halted them in a small chamber. He produced a small tin from his pocket, extracted what looked like a match and struck it against the rock wall. Instead of a normal flame, it produced a steady blue-white glow, enough to illuminate their immediate surroundings without the smoke or brightness of a traditional torch. "Army experiment," he explained briefly. "Never caught on, but useful in situations like this." In the pale light, Emma could see ancient paintings decorating the chamber walls, hunting scenes, spirit figures, and symbols whose meanings were lost to time, Small alcoves held bundles wrapped in deteriorated hide, the remains of those interred here generations ago. Wolf gestured for her to sit, then examined her injured shoulder. His touch was surprisingly gentle as he probed the area. Dislocated, he concluded. I need to put it back before the muscles tighten too much. Emma nodded her consent, bracing herself. Wolf positioned his hands carefully, then with a quick, practiced movement, rotated her arm and pushed the joint back into its socket. The pain was intense but brief, followed by immediate relief. Emma exhaled shakily as Wolf fashioned a sling from a bandana in his pack. That should hold until we reach safer ground, he said, offering her water from his canteen. Emma took a grateful drink, then reached for her slate, which had somehow survived the chaos. Thank you. Again. Wolf shrugged off her gratitude. We're not clear yet. Ryder's reinforcements will be searching the canyon floor, maybe even the lower caves. He consulted a small compass. We need to keep moving. The tunnel system heads northeast for about 2 miles before opening on the far side of the ridge. Emma wrote, Our horses, if they're smart, they've run off, Wolf replied. If not, he didn't finish the thought, but his expression darkened. We'll worry about that once we're out of these caves. They rested briefly, consuming small amounts of the jerky and dried fruit Wolf had packed that morning. Emma marveled at how quickly her life had transformed, from desperate fugitive to being caught in what amounted to a small war between Ryder's men and this enigmatic half-Comanche stranger who had claimed her as family on the strength of a connection neither had known existed until yesterday. Wolf seemed to read her thoughts. Second thoughts? He asked quietly. Emma shook her head firmly, writing, No going back, no. Wolf agreed, only forward. He extinguished the chemical light and rose to his feet. Stay close. The tunnel narrows ahead, and there are side passages where it's easy to get lost. He whistled softly, and Hawk materialized from the darkness where he'd been keeping watch. The dog took point position again as they moved deeper into the ancient passage. The darkness was absolute now, forcing them to proceed by touch and Wolf's occasional instructions. The air grew colder and damper, heavy with mineral scents and something older, the weight of centuries of human presence in this sacred space. Emma lost all sense of time as they navigated the labyrinthine passages. Wolf moved with surprising confidence, never hesitating at junctions, occasionally touching specific rock formations that seemed to serve as markers. Once, they stopped abruptly as Wolf caught her arm in warning. A moment later, she heard it. The distant sound of voices echoing through the tunnel system. Some of them entered the caves, Wolf whispered, but they won't know the way through. They continued with increased caution, Wolf choosing less direct routes that would keep them away from the main passages where sound traveled more easily. The journey took on a dreamlike quality, moving through absolute darkness, guided only by touch, and Wolf's seemingly preternatural sense of direction. After what felt like hours, Emma detected a subtle change in the air, a freshness that hinted at an opening ahead. Wolf confirmed her perception. We're close to the eastern exit, he murmured, but we need to be careful. They might have men watching the obvious escape routes. He guided them to a small chamber near the exit point and instructed Emma to wait while he and Hawk scouted ahead. She sat with her back against the cool stone, listening intently to the silence around her, broken only by the occasional drip of water from unseen ceiling formations. In this moment of forced stillness, the full weight of the past few days crashed over her. Her desperate escape from Ryder's settlement, the discovery of her mother's secret past, the violent confrontation in the canyon. She closed her eyes, allowing herself a brief moment of vulnerability hidden by the protective darkness. When Wolf returned, moving silently through the tunnel, he found her composed once more, ready to continue their flight. 2 men at the main exit, he reported, but there's another way out, smaller, harder to find. We'll use that. Emma followed him through a series of increasingly narrow passages that eventually required them to crawl on hands and knees. Just when she thought the space couldn't get any tighter, they emerged into the open air on a small ledge halfway up the eastern face of the ridge. The night sky spread above them, a canopy of stars unmarred by clouds. The moon cast enough light to see the landscape below, rolling hills giving way to denser forest in the north, open plains to the east. No sign of pursuers in their immediate vicinity. "We need to keep moving," Wolf said, helping Emma navigate the steep path down from the ledge. "Dawn's only a few hours away, and we need to put as much distance between us and this place as possible." With Hawk scouting ahead, they began their descent, leaving the ancient burial caves behind as they moved deeper into the wilderness, away from Ryder's men, but toward an uncertain future and the mystery of Hannah Carlyle's double life. Sashia traveled through the night, guided by starlight and Wolf's intimate knowledge of the terrain. Emma's dislocated shoulder, though reset, throbbed with each step, but she refused to slow their pace. The wilderness changed gradually around them, rocky outcroppings giving way to stands of juniper and oak, then to denser pine forest. As they climbed higher into the Davis Mountains, dawn found them crossing a high meadow filled with wildflowers bent with dew. Wolf finally called a halt beside a small stream flowing clear and cold from higher elevations. "We need to rest," he said, noting Emma's exhaustion despite her determination. "Just a few hours. I'll take first watch." Emma was too tired to argue. She settled beneath the spreading branches of a pine tree, using her pack as a pillow. Hawk positioned himself nearby, his alertness undiminished by the night's exertions. Despite her fatigue, Emma found sleep elusive, her mind replaying the violent confrontation in the canyon, the revelation about her mother, the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were fragmented, a kaleidoscope of memories and fears. Her mother singing softly in a language Emma didn't recognize, Nathan Ryder's face contorted with rage as she fought him off, the sensation of falling into darkness. Through it all, the persistent feeling of being hunted, pursued by shadows that never quite took solid form. She woke with a start to find the sun high overhead. Wolf sat nearby, sharpening his knife with methodical strokes of a whetstone. He glanced up at her movement. "Thought you might sleep longer," he said. "You needed it." Emma sat up, wincing as her shoulder protested. She reached for her slate. "How long?" "About 4 hours," Wolf replied. "We should move on soon. Ryder's men are persistent, if nothing else." Emma nodded, accepting the jerky and dried berries Wolf offered for a quick meal. As they ate, she studied her unlikely protector more carefully. In daylight, the scar on his face was more pronounced, a deliberate mark rather than an accidental injury. His features reflected his mixed heritage, the high cheekbones and copper skin of his Comanche mother, combined with his father's stronger jaw and intense blue eyes. An unsettling combination that would make him stand out in both worlds. Wolf noticed her scrutiny but didn't comment on it. Instead, he said, "We lost the horses. Makes our journey slower but also harder to track." Mixed blessing. Emma wrote, "How far to the cabin now?" "On foot. 4 days, maybe 5. Wolf scanned the horizon, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. "We'll need to find supplies. I know a few places along the way." Emma hesitated, then wrote, "Why are you really helping me?" Wolf considered her question for a long moment. "I told you. Blood connection." Emma shook her head, not accepting this simple answer. She wrote, "There's more." A hint of respect flickered in Wolf's eyes. At her perception, "Yes," he admitted, "there's more." He sheathed his knife, choosing his words carefully. "I've been tracking Ryder's operation for almost 2 years. His settlement is more than it appears. Gun running, land grabs disguised as religious expansion. Disappearances that nobody investigates because the victims are usually Indian or Mexican. Emma wasn't surprised by this information. She wrote, "He calls it cleansing the land for the righteous. Convenient philosophy when you want what others have," Wolf remarked dryly. "I've been gathering evidence, building a case to take to federal authorities." His expression darkened. Not that they've shown much interest in justice where Ryder's concerned. He has powerful friends. Emma nodded in understanding, writing, "In Austin, judges, politicians. He boasts about it." And finding Hannah Carlyle's daughter stumbling into my trading post. Wolf shook his head slightly. "That's not coincidence, that's—" He trailed off, but Emma finished the thought on her slate. Fate. A ghost of a smile touched Wolf's lips. "Something like that. The kind of sign my mother's people would have called medicine strong." They packed up their meager supplies and continued their journey northward. Without horses, they were forced to take more direct routes through the mountains, sometimes following game trails, other times forging paths where none existed. Wolf maintained a steady pace that challenged Emma without exhausting her. Always alert to signs of pursuit or danger. By late afternoon, they had climbed high enough to look back across the territory they'd covered. No sign of Ryder's men, but Wolf remained cautious. "They won't give up easily," he said. "Men like Nathan Ryder can't afford to look weak, especially not when challenged by—" He hesitated. Emma wrote, "A woman and a half-breed." Wolf's expression hardened slightly at the term, but he nodded. "Two people they consider beneath them. Makes it personal." They continued in silence for a time, each absorbed in private thoughts. The forest grew denser as they climbed, the trees older and larger. Wolf moved through this environment with practiced ease, reading signs invisible to untrained eyes, broken twigs, disturbed soil, the flight patterns of birds, all offering information about what had passed through the area recently. Near sunset, he suddenly raised his hand in a signal to stop. Hawk froze instantly, ears perked forward. Emma followed suit, scanning their surroundings for the threat Wolf had detected. "We're being watched," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "Have been for the last mile or so." Emma's hand moved toward her pistol, but Wolf shook his head minutely. "Not Ryder's men. They wouldn't be this quiet." His eyes scanned the dense underbrush and towering pines. "Apache scouts, most likely. We're nearing their hunting grounds." He straightened and called out in a language Emma didn't recognize, a series of guttural sounds that carried clearly through the forest. Silence followed, stretching long enough that Emma wondered if Wolf had been mistaken. Then, with no sound to announce their appearance, 3 men materialized from the forest. They wore a combination of traditional and Western clothing, their dark hair pulled back from weathered faces. Each carried a rifle, though none were aimed directly at Wolf and Emma. The oldest of the 3 stepped forward, his face deeply lined with age and experience. He spoke several sentences in the same language Wolf had used, though Emma couldn't understand the words. The tone was challenging, questioning. Wolf responded respectfully, but without deference, occasionally gesturing toward Emma or the territory behind them. The conversation continued for several minutes, with Hawk sitting calmly at Wolf's feet, showing no aggression toward the newcomers. Finally, Wolf reached into his shirt and withdrew a medallion on a leather cord, the symbol of protection he had mentioned earlier. The older Apache examined it closely, then nodded once before speaking again, his tone less confrontational. Wolf turned to Emma. "This is Chief Running Fox of the Mescalero Apache. He demands to know why we cross his hunting grounds without permission." Emma reached for her slate, but Wolf shook his head. "In their culture, it's better if I speak for both of us for now." He turned back to the chief and continued their conversation. After another exchange, Wolf explained, I've told him we're being pursued by Joseph Ryder's men, that we seek only safe passage to the north." He paused. "And I've told him you are the daughter of White Dove, who was known to their people long ago." This revelation clearly had significance to the Apache. The chief studied Emma with renewed interest, his dark eyes taking in her features, as if searching for something. He spoke again to Wolf, his tone now curious rather than challenging. "He asks if you carry your mother's medicine," Wolf translated. Emma looked confused, not understanding the question. Wolf clarified, "He means her spiritual power, her abilities." Emma shook her head, frustrated by her inability to communicate directly. She wrote quickly, "I don't know what that means." When Wolf translated her response, the chief seemed unsurprised. He spoke at length, gesturing occasionally toward the setting sun or the mountains around them. "He says your mother was known among all the tribes of this region," Wolf translated. "Even as a young woman, she had the sight, visions that came true, the ability to heal with more than herbs and poultices." Wolf's expression was carefully neutral as he relayed this information. He says such gifts often sleep for a generation before awakening. Emma absorbed this information with growing disbelief. The practical, fearful woman who had raised her seemed increasingly distant from the person being described, the respected medicine woman known as White Dove. The chief made a decision, speaking firmly to Wolf while gesturing north. "He's offering us shelter for the night at their temporary camp," Wolf translated. "Says Ryder's men have been trespassing on their lands recently, taking things that aren't theirs." His jaw tightened, "Hunting things that shouldn't be hunted." Emma didn't need clarification to understand his meaning. Ryder's men were known to treat the native population as less than human, targets for sport rather than people deserving of respect. She wrote, "Can we trust them?" Wolf considered the question seriously. "Running Fox is a man of honor," he said, finally. "And the Apache have even more reason to hate Ryder than I do. Yes, I believe we can trust them, at least for tonight." Emma nodded her acceptance, and Wolf conveyed their gratitude to the chief. The three Apache turned and moved silently into the forest, clearly expecting Wolf and Emma to follow. They traveled for approximately 2 miles through increasingly rough terrain before reaching a small clearing nestled between protective rock formations. The Apache camp was minimal but well organized. Several small shelters constructed of branches and hides, a central fire pit currently unlit, and horses picketed in a natural corral formed by the rocks. Women paused in their work to observe the newcomers, their expressions guarded but not hostile. Children watched curiously from behind their mothers, whispering among themselves. Running Fox led them to a shelter on the edge of the camp, indicating it was for their use. Wolf thanked him in the Apache language, maintaining the formal courtesy that seemed to govern their interaction. As the chief walked away, Emma wrote, "What happens now?" "We rest," Wolf replied simply. "Eat, recover our strength." He glanced around. "The camp. The Apache won't betray our presence, and Ryder's men avoid their territory when possible. We're safer here than anywhere else this side of the mountains." Emma nodded, relief washing over her at the prospect of a night without running or fighting. She settled onto a hide mat near the shelter entrance, massaging her injured shoulder, which had stiffened during their long trek. Wolf noticed her discomfort. "Wait here," he instructed, before disappearing into the camp. He returned shortly with an elderly Apache woman who carried a small bag of what appeared to be medicinal supplies. The woman knelt beside Emma, her movements deliberate and dignified. She spoke softly to Wolf, who translated. "This is Singing Bird, the tribe's healer. She offers to treat your shoulder." Emma nodded her consent, and the woman began her work. With gentle but confident hands, She applied a strong-smelling poultice to the injured joint, then bound it with strips of soft leather that supported the shoulder while allowing necessary movement. Throughout the process, she hummed softly, a melody so ancient it seemed to rise from the earth itself. When she finished, the relief was immediate. Emma wrote a message of thanks, which Wolf translated. The old woman studied Emma's face intently, then spoke directly to her in halting English. "You have your mother's eyes," she said, "but not yet her sight." Before Emma could respond, Singing Bird rose and left as quietly as she had come, leaving Emma to wonder just how many people had known her mother better than she had herself. Darkness fell over the Apache camp. Wolf built a small fire near their shelter. The flames cast dancing shadows across his scarred face as he prepared a simple meal from their supplies, supplemented by fresh meat provided by their hosts. Emma watched the activity in the camp, women preparing food, men caring for weapons and horses, children completing final chores before sleep. Despite their precarious existence and the constant threats they faced, there was a harmony to their community that Emma found herself envying. "You're thinking about your mother," Wolf observed, reading her expression with uncanny accuracy. Wondering how she could leave this life behind. Emma nodded, writing, "How could she never tell me any of this?" Wolf considered the question as he tended the fire. "Fear, maybe," he suggested. "Not just of Ryder, but of the past itself, the things she left behind." He glanced around the camp. "This way of life is vanishing. Even the strongest tribes are being forced onto reservations, their lands taken, traditions outlawed." Emma wrote, "But this was who she was." "Sometimes we bury parts of ourselves to survive," Wolf said quietly. "I've seen it happen to many who try to walk between worlds." The simple statement hung between them as they ate in. Comfortable silence. Around them, the Apache camp settled for the night, the quiet murmur of conversations giving way to stillness, broken only by the occasional call of a night bird or the soft nickering of horses. Later, as Emma prepared for sleep, she found herself touching the small locket she wore, the only possession besides her clothing that she had managed to take during her escape from Ryder's settlement. Inside was a faded photograph of her mother and father, taken shortly after their marriage. She opened it now, studying her mother's face in the flickering firelight. Were there signs she had missed? Some hint of the Comanche woman called White, dove hiding behind Hannah Carlyle's careful smile, or had that person been buried so deeply that nothing remained? These questions followed Emma into sleep, where for the first time since her escape, no nightmares awaited. Dawn arrived with a gentle mist blanketing the Apache camp. Emma woke to find Wolf already up, deep in conversation with Chief Running Fox and two other men she hadn't seen before. Their serious expressions suggested the discussion was important. She approached cautiously, not wanting to interrupt, but curious about what had caused such intensity so early in the morning. Wolf noticed her immediately, nodding in acknowledgement before turning back to the chief. Their conversation concluded shortly after, with Wolf clasping forearms with each of the Apache men, a gesture of respect and alliance. "Trouble?" Emma wrote on her slate when Wolf joined her. "News," he corrected. "Scouts returned before dawn. Ryder's men crossed into Apache territory during the night, a larger party than before. At least 15 riders, heavily armed." Emma's alarm must have shown on her face because Wolf continued quickly, "They're on the wrong trail, heading northeast while we're going northwest. But it shows they're expanding their search rather than giving up." She wrote, "They'll find the Apache camp." "Not likely," Wolf assured her. "These people have been avoiding detection by enemies for generations. They're breaking camp now, moving higher into the mountains until the danger passes." Emma glanced around, noticing for the first time the quiet efficiency with which the Apache were dismantling their temporary home. Women rolled hides and packed cooking implements, while men secured weapons and prepared horses. Children gathered, scattered belongings, working alongside their elders with practiced coordination. Within hours, there would be little evidence anyone had ever camped in this clearing. "Running Fox has offered us horses," Wolf continued, "and guides to take us through the high passes. It would cut our journey time in half." Emma raised her eyebrows in question. "I declined the guides," Wolf explained. "Better they stay with their people. But I accepted the horses. We leave within the hour." They joined in the camp's preparations, helping where they could, while assembling their own limited supplies. Singing Bird appeared briefly to check Emma's shoulder, nodding with satisfaction at its improved condition, before pressing a small pouch of herbs into her hand, medicine for the journey ahead. As the Apache prepared to head into more remote mountains, Running Fox approached Emma directly. Through Wolf's translation, he spoke with surprising gentleness for such a weathered warrior. "Your mother's path was difficult," Wolf translated. "Walking between worlds brings pain, but also strength. The daughter of White Dove carries both her burdens and her gifts." The chief touched his chest over his heart. "The voice that matters speaks from here, not from the throat." Emma felt tears threatening at this unexpected kindness. She wrote a message of gratitude, which Wolf translated. Running Fox nodded in acknowledgement, then presented her with a small token, a beaded amulet on a leather cord. "Protection," Wolf explained. "A powerful medicine symbol among his people." The gift was deeply meaningful, coming from a man whose people had every reason to distrust outsiders. Emma placed it around her neck alongside her locket, touching it in silent promise to honor the trust it represented. Their departure from the Apache camp was without ceremony. 2 horses were provided, a sturdy roan gelding for Wolf and a smaller paint mare for Emma. Both animals were well-trained and responsive, accustomed to the challenging mountain terrain. Hawk seemed delighted to have 4-legged companions again, ranging ahead and returning with renewed energy. Wolf led them northwest along trails, so faint Emma would have missed them entirely without guidance. The elevation increased steadily, the air growing cooler and thinner as they climbed. Pine forests gave way to more rugged landscapes, exposed rock faces, alpine meadows, and occasional stands of aspen, whose leaves shimmered silver-green in the mountain breeze. By midday, they had reached a high ridge that offered commanding views in all directions. Wolf dismounted, scanning the territory through his spyglass. Emma joined him, taking in the breathtaking panorama. From this height, the world seemed vast and empty, showing no sign of the dangers they fled or the conflicts that divided the land below. "This was all Comanche territory once," Wolf said quietly. "Before that Apache, before them others whose names are lost." He lowered the spyglass. "Land remembers longer than people do." Emma studied his profile, noting the complex emotions that crossed his face: pride, anger, resignation, determination, all visible in subtle shifts of expression before his features settled back into their customary watchfulness. She wrote, "You could pass for white if you wanted, live differently." Wolf's laugh held no humor. "Could I?" He gestured to his scarred face and copper skin. "Perhaps. Some do. Hide who they are, where they come from. Pretend to be something else." He shook his head. "But the pretending hollows you out over time, until there's nothing left inside that's truly yours." The word struck Emma deeply, making her wonder again about her mother's choices. What had been lost in Hannah Carlyle's own transformation from White Dove? What had that pretense cost her? They continued their journey through the afternoon, maintaining a steady pace that covered significant ground without exhausting their horses. Wolf pointed out landmarks as they traveled, ancient pictographs carved into stone faces, medicine wheels arranged by long-gone peoples, trees shaped by deliberate cultivation to mark important trails or water sources. The landscape was alive with history for those who knew how to read it. As dusk approached, Wolf led them to a small plateau, sheltered by overhanging rock. A spring bubbled from the stone, providing fresh water for them and the horses. The natural formation offered protection from the elements and concealment from anyone below. "We'll camp here," Wolf decided. "Good visibility, defensible position, water. Can't ask for better." They established their camp with practiced efficiency, falling into a comfortable routine, despite having traveled together for only 2 days. Wolf tended the horses while Emma gathered wood for a small, carefully constructed fire that would provide warmth without creating noticeable smoke. Hawk patrolled the perimeter, his hunting occasionally supplementing their supplies with small game. As they prepared a simple meal, Emma found herself studying the amulet Running Fox had given her. The intricate beadwork formed a pattern she didn't recognize. Concentric circles of blue, white, and black beads surrounding a central design that resembled a 4-pointed star. Noticing her interest, Wolf explained, "Protection symbol. The outer circle represents the physical world, the inner circles, the spiritual realms. The star guides the soul between them." He hesitated, then added, "Usually only given to those they consider spiritually significant." Emma raised her eyebrows in question. "Being White Dove's daughter carries weight," Wolf clarified. "Her reputation among the tribes was substantial." Emma wrote, "What exactly could she do?" "The sight they mentioned." Wolf considered his words carefully. "I only know what my father told me and what I've heard from others. She had dreams that showed things to come, could find water in dry lands without searching, knew when someone was lying." He shrugged slightly. "Some called it magic, others a deeper connection to the world's rhythms. The tribes have different names for such gifts." Emma wrote, "I've never experienced anything like that." "Are you sure?" Wolf asked quietly. The question caught her off guard. She started to write a denial, then paused, reconsidering. There had been moments throughout her life, intuitions too accurate to be mere guesswork, dreams that later played out in reality, a sense of knowing things she shouldn't have been able to know. She had always dismissed these experiences, attributing them to coincidence or imagination. Wolf noted her hesitation. "Such gifts often awaken under pressure," he said, "when survival depends on them, or when the person is ready to accept them." Before Emma could respond, Hawk returned from his patrol, his manner alerting Wolf immediately. The dog's posture was tense, his attention focused on the trail below. Wolf moved silently to the edge of the plateau, scanning the darkening landscape. Emma joined him, her hand instinctively moving to her pistol. For several long moments, they detected nothing unusual, just the natural sounds of the mountain at dusk and the deepening shadows of approaching night. Then, almost imperceptible, in the distance a flash of metal caught the last rays of sunlight. A rifle barrel, perhaps, or a stirrup. Wolf's expression hardened. "Riders," he murmured. "Still far off, but following our general direction." Emma wrote quickly, "Riders, men." "Most likely," Wolf confirmed, "though they're off the main trail we followed. Could be coincidence." His tone suggested he didn't believe in such coincidences. They retreated from the edge, keeping low to avoid creating silhouettes against the skyline. Within minutes, Wolf had extinguished their small fire and begun redistributing their supplies for rapid departure if necessary. "We'll wait," he decided. "See if they pass below without detecting us. No point running if we don't have to. Night travel in these mountains is treacherous." They settled into watchful waiting, the plateau now cloaked in growing darkness. Wolf positioned himself where he could observe the trail while remaining hidden, rifle ready across his lap. Emma took a similar position several feet away, creating crossfire coverage as they had in the canyon. The distant riders drew gradually closer, moving cautiously through the unfamiliar terrain. As they came within better view, Wolf confirmed their identity: riders' men, though a smaller group than reported by the Apache. Just 3 riders, moving with the obvious caution of men in hostile territory. Scouts, Wolf whispered, ranging ahead of the main group, looking for sign. Emma watched as the men dismounted near the spring that fed the stream below their position. They examined the ground carefully, clearly searching for tracks or other evidence of recent passage. One pointed at something on the ground, calling the other's attention to whatever he had discovered. "They've found sign," Wolf murmured. "Horse tracks, most likely." Emma's heart raced as the men conferred briefly before one mounted and rode back the way they had come, presumably to inform the main party. The other 2 remained, establishing a small camp near the spring where they could monitor the trail. Wolf retreated from his observation post, gesturing for Emma to follow him to the far side of the plateau, where they could speak without risk of being overheard. "They're setting up a watch point," he explained quietly. "The main group will arrive by morning. They'll fan out from here, searching all possible routes." His expression was grim. "They have better trackers than I expected." Emma wrote, "What do we do?" Wolf considered their options. "We have 2 advantages, darkness and knowing they're there before they know about us." He gestured toward the mountains. "There's another route, more difficult, rarely used. It would take us around them, higher into the mountains before, descending toward my cabin." Emma wrote, "More dangerous." "Yes," Wolf admitted, "especially in darkness, but staying here until morning is more dangerous still." They gathered their supplies and prepared the horses, working as silently as possible. Every movement was calculated to minimize noise, blankets layered under saddles to muffle creaks, bridles wrapped to prevent metal clinking, packs secured with extra care. Wolf led them away from the plateau via a nearly invisible path that seemed to disappear entirely in places. More game trail than human route. The horses were sure-footed, but clearly nervous about traveling such treacherous ground in darkness. Emma kept one hand on her mount's neck, offering reassurance while focusing intently on following Wolf's lead. The path climbed steeply, winding through increasingly barren terrain. Vegetation grew sparse, then disappeared entirely, leaving them exposed on rocky slopes with dizzying drops to either side. The moon provided just enough light to avoid disaster, but every step required careful consideration. They had been traveling for perhaps 2 hours when the trail narrowed to a knife edge, ridge connecting 2 higher peaks. Wind howled across the exposed passage, bitterly cold at this elevation. Wolf dismounted, signaling Emma to do the same. "We lead the horses here," he instructed. "Single file. Stay close to the mountainside." Emma nodded, swallowing her apprehension. The ridge couldn't have been more than 3 feet wide in places, with sheer drops of hundreds of feet on the outer edge. One misstep would be fatal. Wolf went first, leading his horse with Hawk close behind him. Emma followed, keeping her eyes fixed on Wolf's back rather than looking down at the yawning darkness below. The wind buffeted them mercilessly, threatening to push them off balance with each gust. Halfway across the ridge, Emma's horse balked suddenly, refusing to move forward. The animal snorted in fear, eyes rolling white in the moonlight. Wolf turned back, his expression tense as he assessed the situation. "Something spooked her," he said. "Keep hold of the reins, stay calm." Emma stroked the horse's neck, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. The mare's fear was palpable, her body trembling beneath Emma's hand. Wolf returned to them, speaking softly to the frightened animal while checking their surroundings for the source of its distress. A sound reached them then, barely audible above the wind, but unmistakable to ears trained for danger. Voices. Men's voices, carried upward on air currents from the trail far below. "They're moving up," Wolf said grimly, "following our trail despite the darkness." He made a quick decision. "We need to keep going. Can't be caught on this ridge." Emma nodded, continuing to soothe her frightened horse. The mare finally responded, stepping forward reluctantly to resume their perilous crossing. Each step seemed to take an eternity, the voices below growing marginally clearer as their owners climbed higher. When they finally reached the wider ground, on the far side of the ridge, both humans and animals were trembling with the effort of maintaining control in such treacherous conditions. Wolf didn't allow them to rest, however, immediately leading them into a narrow defile between towering rock walls. "This leads to a high valley," he explained as they walked their horses through the passage. "Sheltered, hidden, if we can reach it before they spot our trail across the ridge, we might lose them completely." The defile twisted and turned, occasionally so narrow they had to proceed single file. Eventually, it opened into exactly what Wolf had promised, a small hidden valley nestled among the peaks, complete with a spring-fed pond and sufficient vegetation to sustain their horses. "Old Comanche refuge," Wolf explained as they finally stopped to rest. "Used during wars with the Apache, then against the army. Few outsiders know it exists." Emma dismounted gratefully, her legs unsteady after the nerve-wracking ridge crossing. She wrote, "Will they follow us across the ridge at night?" Wolf shook his head. "Not if they have any sense. Too dangerous without knowing the path." He surveyed their sanctuary with experienced eyes. "We should be safe until morning. Then we'll continue north before they can pick up our trail again." As they established a minimal camp, Emma found herself wondering yet again about the woman who had given birth to her. Had White Dove known these secret places too? Had she traversed these same dangerous paths in another life before becoming Hannah Carlyle? The questions multiplied with each revelation, creating a deepening mystery around the mother she had thought she knew. But one thing was becoming increasingly clear. She was her mother's daughter in more ways than she had realized. The determination that had driven her escape from Ryder's settlement, the instincts that had kept her alive during her flight, the connection she felt to this wild country despite never having known it before, all echoed what she was learning about White Dove. As she finally settled to rest beneath the brilliant canopy of stars, Emma touched both the locket containing her parents' photograph and the protection amulet given by Running Fox. Past and present combined in the woman she was becoming, a woman with no voice but growing determination to find her own path forward, whatever might lie ahead. Morning brought clear skies and biting cold to the hidden valley. Emma woke to find frost glistening on the ground around their camp and Wolf already alert, watching the narrow entrance to their sanctuary. Hawk sat beside him, ears perked forward, both man and dog focused on some disturbance beyond Emma's perception. She approached quietly, questioning Wolf with a glance. "Riders," he confirmed, voice low. "At the base of the ridge. They're examining our crossing point." Emma peered carefully over the rocks. Far below, she could make out tiny figures, men on horseback, clustered at the point where they had begun. Their treacherous night crossing. Even at this distance, their movements suggested frustration and disagreement. "They're arguing about whether to follow," Wolf observed. "Smart money's on going around the long way, but that would take them a full day extra." A hint of satisfaction entered his voice. "Either choice works in our favor. If they follow our trail, they risk the ridge in daylight when they'd be visible for miles. If they go around, we gain significant distance." Emma nodded her understanding, relieved by this tactical advantage. She returned to their small camp to prepare for departure while Wolf continued his surveillance. Their horses had recovered from the previous night's ordeal, grazing contentedly on the valley's sparse but adequate vegetation. As she packed their supplies, Emma noticed something unusual near the spring that fed the small pond. Plants arranged in a pattern that seemed too deliberate to be natural. Drawing closer, she recognized medicinal herbs similar to those Singing Bird had given her, grouped around a stone cairn weathered by years of exposure. Wolf joined her, noting her discovery. "Medicine wheel," he explained. "A place of healing and ceremony." This valley has been sacred to my mother's people for generations. Emma studied the arrangement with new interest, recognizing that the stone placement wasn't random but formed specific patterns with different herbs growing in each section. She wrote, "How do you use it?" Wolf seemed surprised by her question. "Different ways, depending on need, for healing, guidance, protection." He hesitated. "My father taught me some of the old ways, but I'm no medicine man." Emma gestured to suggest. "He'd demonstrate anyway." After a moment's consideration, Wolf knelt beside the circle. He selected several leaves from different plants, crushing them between his fingers before sprinkling them on one of the stones. Then he closed his eyes, palm flat against the central cairn, lips moving in silent words Emma couldn't discern. When he finished, he seemed almost embarrassed, rising quickly and turning toward their camp. "We should go. Make use of whatever lead we have." They departed the valley via a different route than they had entered, a steep trail leading upward before cresting another ridge and beginning a gradual descent into denser forest. The path was challenging, but not as treacherous as their night crossing had been, allowing them to make good progress despite the difficult terrain. By midday, they had descended enough that the landscape changed noticeably. Pine and aspen, giving way to mixed forest with occasional clearings. Wildlife became more abundant, with hawk occasionally flushing grouse or rabbit from underbrush. The air warmed as they lost elevation, though the mountain chill never completely dissipated. They stopped to rest in a small meadow beside a swift-flowing stream. While the horses drank and grazed, Wolf checked their back trail through his spyglass. "No sign of pursuit," he reported, satisfaction evident in his tone. "They either took the long route or gave up entirely." Emma wrote, "Or split up to cover more ground." Wolf nodded, acknowledging the possibility. "True. We'll maintain caution." He studied the terrain ahead. 2 more days to the cabin if we keep this pace, maybe less if the weather holds." Emma wrote, "What then?" It was the question that had hovered unspoken between them. What happened once they reached Wolf's sanctuary? What future could exist for a voiceless fugitive pursued by powerful enemies? Wolf didn't answer immediately, busying himself with checking his weapons before finally meeting her gaze. "That depends on what you want, Emma." The use of her name, which she had shared via Slate during their journey but which he rarely spoke aloud, emphasized the seriousness of the question. She considered carefully before writing, "I want my mother free. I want Ryder stopped." Wolf studied her words, his expression thoughtful. "Bold ambitions," he said, neither dismissive nor discouraging. "Ryder's settlement is well protected. Your mother is closely guarded. It would take more than 2 people to accomplish either goal." Emma's jaw set stubbornly as she wrote, "You said you've been gathering evidence against him." "Yes," Wolf confirmed. "Documentation of land theft, witness testimonies about disappeared travelers, records of weapons shipments. Enough to interest. Federal authorities if they weren't corrupt or intimidated." Emma wrote rapidly, "What about a newspaper? Someone who would publish the truth." A hint of appreciation flickered in Wolf's eyes. "There's a journalist in Santa Fe who's been investigating frontier corruption, man named Ellis Hammond. He's published stories about reservation conditions that others wouldn't touch." Wolf considered the idea. With solid evidence, he might take on Ryder. Hope kindled in Emma's chest. The first real possibility of justice she'd encountered since her escape. She wrote, "We combine your evidence with what I know about the settlement." Wolf nodded slowly. "It could work," he admitted. "Though Ryder would retaliate hard." Emma wrote determinedly, "I'm not afraid." "Maybe you should be," Wolf said quietly. "Men like Ryder don't submit to justice easily. They burn everything around them when cornered." Emma's expression didn't waver as she added, "For my mother, it's worth the risk." Wolf studied her for a long moment, taking in her resolve. Finally, he nodded once. Agreement, respect, and commitment in a single gesture. For White Dove, he said, it's worth the risk. They continued their journey through the afternoon, the conversation shifting their relationship subtly. Partners. In a mission now, not merely fugitives sharing a temporary alliance. Wolf began sharing more detail about the evidence he had gathered and his unsuccessful attempts to interest territorial authorities in Ryder's activities. The settlement appears legitimate on the surface, he explained as they rode. Religious, community, self-sufficient, isolated by choice. The territorial governor sees no reason to interfere with good Christian folks practicing their faith. Emma wrote, "It's a prison for many, women especially." "I know," Wolf acknowledged grimly, "but proving that requires testimonies that victims are usually too frightened to give." The implication hung between them. Emma's testimony would be essential to any case against Ryder. Her first-hand knowledge of the settlement's inner workings, combined with Wolf's external evidence, might finally create a compelling enough case to overcome official reluctance. As dusk approached, they made camp in a sheltered hollow beside a small tributary. The night promised to be cold again, but Wolf constructed a well-concealed fire that provided warmth without visible smoke. They ate a simple meal supplemented by fish Wolf caught in the stream, a welcome change from their travel rations. Emma found herself studying Wolf as he moved around their camp. His efficiency, his constant awareness of their surroundings, the ease with which he existed in this wilderness. He was a man between worlds in every sense, carrying aspects of both his Comanche and white heritage without fully belonging to either. Like her mother had been, perhaps. He caught her watching and raised an eyebrow in question. Emma hesitated, then wrote, "How did you learn all this? Survival, tracking, fighting?" "My father taught me what he knew," Wolf answered. "The rest came from necessity." He stoked the fire before continuing. "When you don't fit neatly into either world, you learn to survive on the edges." Emma wrote, "That's where my mother and I lived too." The edges. Wolf nodded in understanding. "It's a hard place to exist. Always watching, always ready for the day when neighbor turns against you because they're reminded you're different." The candid admission revealed more about Wolf's experiences than he had previously shared. Emma sensed there were stories behind his words, painful encounters that had shaped his solitary existence. She wrote, "What happened with the settlement? You mentioned helping women escape before." Wolf's expression darkened. 8 years ago, I guided 3 women and their children away from Ryder's control. Got them to Santa Fe, helped them start new lives under different names." He touched the scar that marked his face. "Ryder's men caught up with me on the return journey, decided to leave a message for anyone else considering interference with the settlement." The brutal simplicity of his statement made Emma wince. She wrote, "And still you help others." "Some things matter more than safety," Wolf replied, echoing Emma's earlier sentiment about freeing her mother. After a pause, he added, "Your mother helped those women too. Did you know that?" Emma's surprise must have been evident because Wolf continued, "She provided money, clothes, a place to hide during their initial escape. Her name was mentioned by all 3 women when they described how they got away." This revelation both stunned and comforted Emma. She had always known her mother, was kind and compassionate, but the idea that she had actively risked their safety to help others escape Ryder's control added another dimension to the woman she thought she knew. She wrote, "She never told me." "Protecting you," Wolf suggested. "The less you knew, the safer you were if questioned." Emma considered this explanation, remembering how her mother would sometimes disappear for hours without explanation, returning with a tight expression that discouraged questions. How parcels would be prepared and hidden, then vanish overnight. small mysteries that made more sense with this new understanding. Night settled fully around their camp, stars emerging in brilliant profusion overhead. Wolf took first watch, while Emma tried to rest, though sleep proved elusive as her mind processed the day's revelations. The person she had been just 1 week ago, terrified, fleeing without direction or ally, seemed increasingly distant from the woman she was becoming. When she finally drifted to sleep, her dreams were vivid and strange. She saw her mother, not as the quiet, fearful Hannah Carlyle of her childhood, but as a younger woman with proud bearing and confident movements, white dove among her people. In the dream, her mother spoke to her in a language Emma didn't recognize, yet somehow understood, telling her that strength sometimes hid in silence, that the deepest waters often made no sound. She woke suddenly in the darkest hours before dawn, the dream still vivid in her mind. Wolf was alert instantly, sensing her disturbance. "What is it?" he asked quietly. Emma reached for her slate, hesitated, then set it aside. Instead, she pointed northeast, toward a distant ridge, barely visible in the moonlight. Wolf frowned, scanning the direction she indicated. "You heard something?" She shook her head, frustrated by her inability to explain. The certainty she felt came from somewhere beyond rational thought, a knowledge as clear as if she had witnessed it directly. She tried again, miming riders moving along the ridge. Wolf studied her for a long moment, then reached for his spyglass. He trained it on the distant ridge, adjusted the focus, and went completely still. After several seconds, he lowered the glass, his expression unreadable in the dim light. 3 riders, he confirmed quietly, moving fast along the northern trail. He looked at Emma with new consideration. "How did you know?" She touched her temple, then her heart, unable to explain even with words how the knowledge had come to her. It had simply been there upon waking, absolute and undeniable. Wolf's eyes widened slightly. "Your mother's gift," he murmured. "The seeing." Emma wasn't sure she believed in such things, but she couldn't deny what had just happened. She had known about riders no human eye could have detected without aid, on a trail she hadn't even known existed. "We need to move," Wolf decided, already packing their supplies. "That trail intersects our planned route about 10 miles ahead. If they're moving at that speed, they'll reach the crossing point before us." They broke camp with practiced efficiency, all traces of their presence erased within minutes. As they mounted their horses, Wolf gave Emma a searching look. "If you sense anything else," he said carefully, "tell me immediately." She nodded, equally uncertain about this unexpected development, but accepting its utility. As they rode into the pre-dawn darkness, Emma found herself touching the Apache protection amulet at her throat, wondering what other aspects of her mother's heritage might be awakening within her, and what price such gifts might eventually demand. 6 months after their escape from Ryder's men, Emma stood at the window of Ellis Hammond's newspaper office in Santa Fe. Winter had transformed the territorial capital into a snow-covered scene, peaceful in appearance though Emma's mind was anything but calm. Behind her, the printing press clattered rhythmically as Hammond's assistants prepared tomorrow's edition featuring the latest exposé on Joseph Ryder's settlement, an investigation that had reached Washington, D.C. and could no longer be ignored by territorial authorities. "Federal marshal arrives by week's end," announced Hammond, entering with fresh papers. The lean journalist had embraced their cause with the fervor of a man who recognized the story of a lifetime. 7 former settlement members willing to testify, plus your documentation of land theft, weapons stockpiling, and financial crimes. Riders finished. Wolf entered, bringing a blast of cold air. 6 months of working alongside Emma and Hammond had done little to soften his vigilant nature. "Marshals are assembling a posse in Albuquerque. 30 men, well armed." Emma's slate asked the only question that truly mattered. "Mother?" Our source confirms she's still in Ryder's house. More isolated since the newspaper stories began, but alive. Emma turned back to the window. These months of methodical work had been necessary but agonizing, knowing her mother remained captive. The strange awareness she'd first experienced in the mountains had strengthened, sensing dangers before they appeared, recognizing truth or deception, occasionally glimpsing fragments of events yet to occur. Now, as snow continued to fall, she felt a familiar prickling awareness. She returned to the men, writing quickly, "We need to move faster. Ryder knows the marshals are coming." Hammond looked skeptical. How could he? That information is closely held. Emma shook her head, frustrated by her inability to explain the certainty she felt. He's planning something. Mother in danger. Wolf didn't question her. In 6 months, he had learned to trust these insights. If Ryder suspects the settlement will be raided, he might eliminate witnesses. The marshals won't move without federal authorization, Hammond pointed out. Emma wrote with determination, "We don't wait." The plan came together swiftly. Wolf's tactical experience combined with Emma's knowledge of the settlement created a viable extraction strategy. Hammond provided horses, supplies, and promised to cover their absence. By dusk, they reached the ridge overlooking Ryder's settlement. Buildings clustered around a central meeting hall surrounded by dormant fields. Lights glowed in windows. Armed men patrolled established routes. "More guards than usual," Wolf confirmed through his spyglass. Emma pointed to a building set apart from the others, Ryder's residence, where her mother was kept. 2 guards stood at the main entrance. Another patrolled the perimeter. When darkness enveloped the landscape and snowfall intensified, they moved. Hawk remained with their horses, trained to guard them until return. Wolf and Emma approached from the east, using a dry creek bed for concealment until reaching the perimeter. Guards passed on predictable schedules, creating brief windows when movement between shadows was possible. They reached the side of the main house without detection, pressing close beneath a window. Wolf boosted Emma up to peer inside. Her mother sat beside a small desk, thinner than Emma remembered, but unmistakably Hannah Carlyle. Emma tapped the glass lightly. Her mother looked up, confusion crossing her face before recognition dawned. She moved to the window, carefully checking for observers before opening it slightly. "Emma," she whispered, voice thick with emotion, "you shouldn't be here. It's too dangerous." Emma gestured urgently, indicating they needed to leave immediately. "I can't simply climb out. There are alarms on all doors and windows." Wolf appeared beside Emma. "Mrs. Carlyle, I'm Thomas Montgomery." The name triggered visible shock. "James Montgomery's son. The resemblance. I should have known Emma would find you. We don't have much time. Ryder knows something's coming." "Yes. He's planning to move the most loyal followers to a secondary location tomorrow. Taking me with them." She glanced over her shoulder. "He's in the meeting hall now, preparing them." Wolf nodded. "Is there basement access?" "Root cellar door on the north side. Usually locked, but I have a key. Give me 5 minutes to retrieve something." They moved toward the north side, navigating between patrols with increasing difficulty as the snowfall lightened. The root cellar doors were partially concealed by drifted snow. Wolf cleared enough to access the padlock while Emma kept watch, until Hannah arrived, opening it from inside. They slipped into darkness that smelled of earth and preserved vegetables. Emma embraced her mother fiercely. Hannah returned the embrace, then held her daughter at arm's length. "You've changed," she whispered. "I see it in your eyes. The sight has awakened in you." Emma nodded, confirming what they both recognized. Hannah turned to Wolf. "You have your father's courage and your mother's wisdom." Hannah produced a small leather satchel. "Documents. Proof of everything Ryder has done. I've been collecting them for years." Their planning was interrupted by alarm bells clanging through the compound. Shouts followed, then boots pounding overhead. They've discovered I'm missing, Hannah said. We need another way out. Emma pointed to a narrow tunnel leading from the cellar's far corner. The children sometimes use it to bring me food. It comes out near the creek bed. The passage proved barely wide enough for adults, forcing them to crawl through dirt and darkness while alarms continued. They emerged finally into the frigid night. Concealed by underbrush beside the frozen creek, they had nearly reached their rendezvous point when a voice called from behind. That's far enough. They turned to find Nathan Ryder standing 20 yards away, rifle aimed at Hannah. 2 disciples flanked him, weapons ready. Did you think you could steal what belongs to me, Hannah? Wolf moved slightly, positioning himself protectively. She doesn't belong to anyone, Ryder. Everything in the settlement belongs to my father. Property, livestock, women. His smile was terrible in the dim light. And you, Emma, the ungrateful daughter who nearly killed me during her departure. Hannah stepped forward. Let them go, Nathan. Your quarrel is with me. You're not worthy of quarrel, Hannah. Just punishment. He raised his rifle, starting with the half-breed. What happened next occurred with blinding speed. Hannah lunged forward. Wolf drew and fired. One of Nathan's men discharged his weapon wildly. Nathan staggered backward as Wolf's bullet found its mark. When the chaos cleared, Nathan lay wounded. In the snow, his remaining disciple retreating. Wolf stood with his smoking pistol, and Hannah knelt in the snow, blood spreading across her chest where Nathan's bullet had struck her instead of Wolf. "Mother!" Emma's voice emerged as a ragged whisper, the first sound she had produced in months, torn from her by desperation. Hannah looked up in surprise, a smile touching her lips despite her pain. "You found your voice. I knew you would." They fled. Through the winter night, reaching an abandoned cabin by dawn, with Hannah barely conscious. Federal marshals arrived shortly after. Hammond had reached them with the location. 1 week later, Emma stood beside her mother's bed in Santa Fe. Hannah was recovering, her wounds serious, but no longer life-threatening. The marshals took the settlement yesterday, Emma reported, her voice still raspy but improving. Both riders arrested on multiple charges. The women and children are being relocated to safety. Wolf entered with news from the federal prosecutor. They're building the strongest case I've ever seen. Ryder's political connections are abandoning him. Hannah's eyes held a question Emma recognized without words. I'm staying, Emma confirmed, through the trials, through whatever comes next. We began this together. We'll finish it the same way. Later, as sunset painted the mountains, Emma stood with Wolf on the small balcony. What happens after the trials? Wolf asked quietly. When this is finished? The answer came with surprising clarity. We continue, she said simply. There are other riders, other settlements, other people without voices who need someone to speak for them. Wolf nodded. Understanding her words encompassed more than just future work. They acknowledged the bond formed between them. Forged, in danger, strengthened through shared purpose, evolving into something neither had expected. Your mother's vision about a voiceless child who would speak truth to power came true. Emma smiled, touching the protection amulet she still wore alongside her mother's locket. White Dove's daughter, she murmured, finding her place between worlds. The circle had completed, and a new one was beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.